Abhishek, hi, it's good to have you with us.
Hi, Ashu. It's good to be here as well. And just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Abhishek, and I run this initiative called Nav Gurukul from last 5 years.
Sure.
Um, I'm myself an engineer, a software engineer from IT Delhi, graduated in 2013. But then when I basically started my own startup when I was in third year of the college,
Right.
and it was funded by Kunal and Rohit from Snapdeal. But just after we graduated from the college, it was acquired by another organization. And then we started this another initiative called Frankly Me. We raised about $2.6 million. But while doing all of that, I basically realized that I don't want to be in startups anymore. So
Right.
started working with Delhi government, and
Right.
now I'm back. I'm basically back to current where we run Nav Gurukul, and we'll probably talk more about it.
That is absolutely fantastic. I mean, I've had the opportunity of knowing you personally, right? And I've, kind of been amazed with the journey that you have. And while you say that you didn't want to be in startups, right? NavGurukul is a is a beautiful startup that you've come back at again, right? I think the only difference is that this is for impact. You're focusing big time on impact, and I think your motivation and I think your intent is to create difference in the lives of many people who come from the bottom of the pyramid, right? Who
Right.
necessarily cannot afford a good education, right?
Right.
Abhishek, take me through your journey of building up Gurukul, right? What was the motivation? How did it happen? Was
Right.
this an accident? Was this something which was driven from an observation? How did it happen, right? What motivated you to do something like this?
Right. So when I was basically doing the startups, frankly, me and Zambal. So fortunately, when I got my first little exit,
Right.
I had little money in my bank, and I was thinking what to do with that money. So I would
Sure.
go to people and ask them like, "What do you do with money that you have?" Or
Right.
essentially, "What are you earning money for?"
Right.
And most of the answers that people had, I think I was not really convinced about them. I
Right.
mean, I didn't see those answers basically as something which will guide me in my life.
Right.
So practically, one unanswered question in my life was like, what do I earn money for?
Right.
And I feel I was probably a very bad person at answering these questions, but I couldn't get an answer even right now. So
Right.
at best, I basically got an answer that I want maybe a car, maybe a small house in a village or whatever. But for that, I don't need so much money. I don't need to
Right.
basically work, let's say, 30 years of my life in a startup
Right.
or whatever. So then the question came like, what do I really do with my time?
Right.
Uh, so obviously being happy was important, but also then I realized that how do I share what I have?
Sure.
I mean, the obvious question of privilege, etc.
Right.
So I decided to basically start from a blank slate. I started working with Delhi government on a pro bono basis.
Right.
I started working in the education department. Largely, I think it's a bias. I would
Right.
not say I chose that because when we come from middle class, I mean, the first thing we have always heard is "beta pad lo aur ye ho jayega." So I mean, it feels like education is our savior.
Right.
So I mean, I also thought maybe I'll work on education, will help other people,
Right.
other people lives, etc. So I
Right.
started working with the education department, and there I observed a very interesting thing. Most of the students were doing really well in their schools. I mean,
Right.
government has spent a lot and lot on infrastructure in schools, etc. But in terms of colleges, the quality is absolutely like it's very sad. Like I mean, even if
Right.
you look at engineering, for example,
Right.
it's considered like it's reports suggest that 93% of the engineers are not even employable after they
Right.
graduate of the college.
Right.
And practically all the major companies like TCS, Wipro, Infosys, they run their own 4 month training centers where they
Right.
essentially train the recruited people from the colleges.
Right.
So I realized that there's a lot that can be done here, and
Sure.
if we essentially do it systemically and focus more on the marginalized people or on the for the
Right.
vulnerable people, we can directly create a huge impact.
Right.
Yeah,
Very
so that's
interesting.
how we started it.
Very interesting. Abhishek, is this about women, children, women, child, or that is one of the initiatives that you have, right? I mean, because a lot of conversations that you and me have had, right? You essentially told me, your passion and your or a lot of your energy is spent on ensuring that women are educated, they become independent in the process, right? So that they don't have to necessarily go through the kind of abuse that they do, right? You tell us a little more about that.
Right. So largely, I mean, if you look at any sector, especially or
Sure.
even just the financial sector, any sector,
Sure.
most of the wealth is owned by men,
Right.
and most of the boards are basically dominated by men.
Sure.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of history to it. And the only way I feel this can be reversed is that if we at the trading level itself we start changing some of these things. For example, in
Right.
my college, IT Delhi, there was a batch of 81 people in computer science, and only
Right.
five were women. I could
Okay.
literally still count those names.
Sure.
So essentially, if you look at entry level itself, when there are differences even at the entries, obviously when you basically go to the exits,
Right.
or go to the even senior more positions,
Right.
you even have lesser and lesser of women. So
Sure.
I feel, I mean, it's really important to build this representation,
Right.
and not just for women. I mean, even let's say representation of people from rural areas.
Sure.
There are people in our sector who are from rural areas, but that's still a very small minority,
Correct.
and it's something which I think needs to be boosted in a strong way.
Right.
Potentially is everywhere in the country, and I
Right.
mean rural areas is brimming with it.
Sure.
So tribal areas, basically people who are living in red light areas, etc.,
Right.
etc. So essentially, this is the diversity that NavGurukul tries to capture, and in fact,
Sure.
we have all the parts that I mentioned. We have a lot of diversity from all of these places. We have actually girls coming in from 18 different states of the country, including
Right.
Kashmir, Assam, Tripura.
Right.
We have students from red light areas. We have students who are from orphanages, or who are HIV positive, and
Very interesting.
the options are limited.
Right.
Rural areas, tribal areas. We have girls coming from tribal areas in Maharashtra, Odisha, Tripura, and we're partnering with more and more governments to basically reach out to
Right.
a very diverse pool of candidates.
Right.
So I think the idea is to be able to promote diversity at this step one, so that
Sure.
when you're looking at senior positions, it only becomes easier to do that.
Right. Interesting. Abhishek, I have, before I dive into some specific questions, right, about, the kind of impact that you created, and all of that, right, and the process that you follow at NavGurukul, give me a landscape of this, right? We were in a session recently, right? It was about India Education Futures, right? This was an event which was hosted by Asia Tech Journal with our partner, India Education Network, right? And we deliberated across all of this for 2 days, right? Where we were talking about models, which are made for urban India, which are, for Bharat. And I think that is essentially what you're highlighting to us, right? But give me a landscape of how large this problem is, right? Because when you're talking about education, we tend to miss out on the impact on bottom of the pyramid, right? Give me a landscape of that, right? How large is this a problem when you look at India as a whole?
Right. I mean, I can talk specifically about software engineering.
Sure.
In terms of, I mean, the entire India, obviously the problem size is even more staggering. But if we
Right.
just look at software engineering, currently there are about 1.5 lakh jobs. But it is estimated only 10 to 15,000 people are essentially properly trained, and remaining people have to be basically trained
Upskills.
by the company itself.
Right.
In terms of the number of seats that we have for software engineering, I think it spans like somewhere around 6 to 7 lakhs.
Right.
But practically, like, we're not getting that result out, obviously,
Right.
because out of those 6-7 lakhs people, we are just able to
Sure.
train maybe 15-20,000 people.
Right.
And that's where I think a huge gap of efficiency lies, and
Right.
to be able to work on it. And I think this picture continues over all the sort of professions, whether it be software
Right.
engineering, whether it be graphics, or etc., etc.
Sure. Sure.
It's a very sad truth in our country that on the one side we say there are no jobs, and at the same
Right.
time there are companies which are struggling with the lack of talent, right? I mean,
Right.
on one side we say we don't have sufficient counseling psychologists in the country, and
Right.
then we have so many people who basically want jobs and they have the aptitude to be trained for counseling psychology,
Right.
right? And it holds true for software engineers, it holds true for graphic designers, fashion designers, doctors, every position you
Interesting.
name it. We have people looking for jobs, needing jobs, and are talented to be able to do that
Right.
very well, right?
Right.
And then we have sectors demanding them.
Sure.
And obviously it's very well researched thing that the better skill force you have in a country, the faster the company grows,
Right.
country grows. So essentially it's in the benefit of the entire sector as well as the country to be able to invest a lot in the higher education. But I think what's happening, especially, is that government, in a bid to sort of democratize higher education,
Right.
they made various structures to deal with it.
Sure.
So instead of just saying that we'll have colleges, they basically said, okay, let's have 1 year ITI courses, then we have vocational courses, etc., etc.,
Right.
etc. But the problem is that in terms of the problem of efficiency, we have never been able to do that.
Right.
Essentially, all our structures are equally inefficient. Our
Right.
colleges are inefficient, our ITIs are inefficient, our vocational education, so we can't even talk about it. So
Right.
so essentially, I think this problem of efficiency is something that higher education has had, throughout from a long time, and nobody has
Right.
been focusing on that.
Sure.
There are some colleges which obviously churn out very good results, like IITs or
Right.
top NITs and triple ITs. But I don't feel that's necessarily because government is investing a lot. I think that's a lot because most of the people who are going in there, they create
Right.
their own environment. Like, I
Right.
didn't learn as much as from my professors, as much as I learned from my peers in the environment.
Sure.
So essentially, that way, I think a lot of work has to be done.
Right.
And for that, we believe that we have to return to how education used to be in some ways, how
Sure.
Taxila or Nalanda universities approached it. They used to
Right.
run universities with thousands and thousands of people, and
Right.
supposedly they were super efficient. And that's why we call ourselves Nav Gurukul. I mean, we're
Sure.
basically looking at the old Gurukul model from a new lens to
Right.
be able to have thousands of people, but ensure that the results are really, really high. So
Interesting.
at NavGurukul, we ensure that the placement rates are close to 100%.
Right.
And for obviously that's very challenging, right? I mean, you're essentially getting students from really marginalized areas who do not
Right.
know maths, who do not know English, who do not know
Right.
computers. Many of them have not seen computers.
Right.
And within a year, you want them to compete with people who have had all of those and
Right.
4 years and still are not getting jobs. I mean,
Right.
so this, I mean, for us, this was at least a 20 times efficiency jump that we had to work
Interesting.
for.
Interesting. Abhishek, I have a question, right?
Yeah.
And which is more macro in its, essentially what I'm trying to sort of comprehend or get to is what is leading into this inefficiency, right? I think, across forums, we're talking about, how efficiency can be brought in. There is, academia partnership that we're talking about. We were with a lot of chancellors and vice chancellors, right? Just about a few days back, right? And when you hear them, they understand the problem beautifully, right? A lot of these guys want to replicate international models where they're saying, we want to build a university which is research led. We want to do like a variety of those things. What is lacking? I mean, what is leading to that inefficiency? Is it because, is that like because of there's a gap at the faculty level? Is there a gap at a student level which is more to do with exposure? Where is that efficiency kicking in from?
Right. There are many, many reasons, but I fully agree with you. There are many people who are running these universities or colleges who understand this inefficiency gap and they're not even trying to hide it.
Sure.
I think that's beautiful. But the issues are manifold. For example, if you're running a university, you need to hire people at a certain level. For example, you can
Right.
hire PhDs for your faculties.
Sure.
Now we are talking about software engineering jobs. These are not software research jobs, for example.
Right. Right.
You don't need a PhD to teach software engineer.
Sure.
In fact, I know of so many 18-year-olds or 20-year-olds who are amazing software engineers, amazing teachers, and they'll
Right.
probably fit the bill far better than most of the people, right?
Right.
But our universities won't accept them. Even our
Right.
schools won't accept them, basically.
Sure.
So I feel there's a lot of lack of understanding of what kind of curriculum we should be looking at, what kind of
Right.
teachers should be looking at. Even in my college, I think things have changed now, but even until 7 or 8 years ago, a lot of our curriculum was computer science. We
Mhm.
had very little computer engineering.
Right.
So I think a lot of things are there. Outdated curriculum, teachers who are completely who lack the context that is needed
Right.
to teach software engineering.
Right.
And same holds true for all other professions as well. I
Right.
mean, and then at the same time, there are students who are coming without proper orientation or inclination understanding. So, and especially they're coming for a 4-year course,
Right.
especially for like 2 to 3 years. I don't think people even start learning. Most of the students, there are some students who are
Right.
serious and then essentially they are blamed for it.
Right.
But most students, they feel like, only the 4th year is for learning.
Right.
And finally, there's no incentive to leave the college early,
Sure.
right? I mean, ideally, if you're doing well and if you want to leave the college early after 1.5 years and you're
Right.
getting a job, you should be able to leave.
Correct.
I don't understand why we are forced to attend the 4 years if we're essentially
Right.
getting the same outcome, right? I mean, so I think a lot of structurally and in terms of faculty wise, in terms of the mindsets, there are many issues that we can essentially work on. And again, the fortunate thing is people have started paying attention. A lot of credit-based systems are coming in, which are
Right.
now allowing people to basically take a lot more internships. Even
Right.
say that after 3 years, I'm going to do 1 full year of internship.
Sure.
In my time, we didn't have any such example. BITS was
Right.
one of the very few examples where you could have 6 months internship.
Right.
Hopefully, maybe they will come with 18 months internship structure.
Right. And I think even IIT Kanpur has come up with something similar, right? I think where they're
Yeah.
saying that you can take a week, take a year off, and maybe 2, right? Go out, work, build, whatever,
Yeah,
and then you
exactly.
can come back and complete your course. I think that's a new
Precisely.
shift, which is
Yes.
exciting to see.
Yes.
But I
Yeah,
think
just
that's
that,
happening.
I mean, COVID has also accelerated that. Just that I think
Sure.
it needs to happen a lot, right? I mean, it
Right.
should not be a number of examples you can count on hand.
Right.
And then in terms of you mentioned the involvement of the industry, I think that has
Right.
to increase a lot.
Sure.
Most of the industries, as I mentioned, they run their own training institutes and they run it pretty well. Mindtree,
Right.
TCS, Pro, most of them.
Right.
So there should be a very direct collaboration where industry just does not focus on giving grants or hiring, but they also actually focus on using their pedagogies in the colleges. The
Right.
university pedagogy is not to hire PhDs. The industry pedagogy is not to hire PhDs. The
Right.
industry pedagogy is apprenticeship based, where
Correct.
if I join an industry, and if you're my mentor, you're going to keep giving me problems,
Right.
and until I basically solve them, you're basically going to continuously give me some kind of mentorship.
Right.
And when I basically keep moving and pass all the levels, you're going to pass me and say you're ready now.
Right.
And this is how traditionally apprenticeship has worked in the country. So
Sure.
it's not something which is new. It's just that we have to again figure out what has worked for us in the past and pick it up.
Sure. Abhishek, this is a question that I'm asking everybody, right, out there. Okay, what has happened is COVID has really kind of changed how we did things, right? COVID has given a very different kind of an exposure to everybody, right? Thank God for data, right, and thank God for cheap data, which was available to everybody across the country, right? So people had access to a lot of, say, for example, content, information. They were listening to, reading like a variety of things. I think this has been a very very different period, right? We've continuously spoken about exposure, right? That typically a tier 2 or tier 3 market lags behind in terms of its exposure and all of that, right? But here was a very unnatural condition which brought everybody to the same stage, right? Everybody was essentially consuming the same thing, right? Which also means that the complexity on the consumer paradigm is going to change, right?
Yeah.
Where typically a product life cycle, which was say for a 5 year or a 6 year or 7 year, is now going to shrink to just about a year and a half too, right? Which essentially means that the workforce is going to be aligned, has to be aligned in a very different way. The kind of agility that they'll have to have will be very different, right? Do you think when you talk of say an apprenticeship based model, and models which are like a 4 month or a 6 month training program and stuff like that, right? Do you think industry is going to have that kind of time to react to the changes that they're gonna face and see?
So I feel there are a few things which are happening in the industry. One, we are increasingly shifting to gig economy.
Sure.
So even for example, nursing, a lot of hiring that is happening right now in nursing is also basically based on gig economy model. And I think that itself changes a lot of equation in terms of how, who takes the responsibility of training, because
Sure.
in a gig economy, the relationship is far less strongly defined than in an employee and employer based relationship. And that's where I think it's a very specific training approach, I think, is needed.
Right.
If you look at Urban Clap, for example, they're practically training people for their own venture. And right now they're the basically market leader, but and same goes for Byju's or White Hat and basically any startup out there.
Right.
So essentially that the idea here is that one, how do we essentially identify who is going to focus on training?
Right.
Right now, obviously that responsibility is not defined, and sometimes startups pick it up, sometimes government pick it up, sometimes colleges pick it up. So I think having very clear relationships is going to help us. And again, some relationships are being forged. I recently saw that Urban Clap did sign up with Delhi government to basically partner in that. So that's one. The second important thing here, especially, is the fact that we have to understand that internet comes with its own set of inequities. While it seems very fancy and nice that internet and digital era is bringing equity and people are getting access to everything, same people have access to the same content, that's actually very, very untrue. If you're going to go into the remote parts of the country, people do not still have smartphones. They still do not have access to data. Even if they have access to the data, they don't have access to the network which supports 4G. Even if today I go to a remote place in Uttarakhand, it's actually very hard to do a video call. Most of the time connections is very shaky. And then when your parents do not know any tech, when they do not know any content, they're not there to advise you. So essentially, you do not even know what to do. The kind of classes which happen, online classes happen in a government school, and the kind of classes that happen in a expensive school, in a remote setup, are also equally divergent as were physical classes. So I mean that divergence is pretty much there. And then you have Byju's, etc., which are selling their highly priced subscriptions to people, who can afford, but then people who cannot afford, they still, again, they do not have that access to the kind of content that they need. And then someone may say, oh, YouTube is there, we can essentially go and learn from there. But again, the students need a lot of hand holding and direction when they're younger. And at least a direction has to be very clearly spelled out. You can't expect a child to go to YouTube and essentially spend time learning and not essentially get distracted by the plethora of all of the content, because YouTube is never built for learning. It's never built to expose you to a diversity of content. It is built to basically give you the maximum entertainment value, maximum addiction value. So even YouTube is basically going to showcase videos which are, let's say, on breadth. Because if, let's say, a video is having a lot of depth on a topic, they're not going to, they're going to be drop-offs. Essentially, it's not a learning platform, and we have to sort of, make sure that we understand that.
I think what you're saying is that given this dynamic environment that we'll have to deal with now onwards, it will have to be a more integrated approach, right? Is what you're saying, right? And
Yeah.
you the assumption that while the consumer side exposure has increased, there are gaps when it comes to the human resource availability to deliver for those changing demands, right? Which essentially means that the industry academia partnership will have to be all the more stronger going forward,
Yeah.
right? Is that what you're highlighting to us?
Yes, yes, and it has to be a lot more systemic. For example, content, right? I mean, uh, if you're looking from the perspective of content for a girl in rural area, where is the content? Because they can't
Interesting.
access these startups.
Correct.
And then the government quality, and the government has done, I mean, have started their own initiative. Diksha is a
Correct.
platform. Then
Correct.
this platform for, I mean, there are many platforms the government has been launching. But again, like the quality of platforms is not up to the mark where it
Correct.
satisfies the quality for them. So I think
Correct.
so there are many bridges here, and a lot of it, as you have rightly mentioned, it is going to come with the right kind of partnerships.
Right.
And fortunately, a lot of these partnerships are happening. So it's
Right.
not a very I mean, it's not a very dismal or negative picture. Just that yes, it's going to take us a lot of time to respond.
Right.
And hopefully, the faster we do, we are going to save future of so many more people.
I think necessity is the mother of all inventions, and I think that trust ecosystem is going to improve, right, as we go
Yeah.
along, right? But that sort of brings me to a very natural question, right? You've been working with a lot of large consulting companies, right? Give us a sense of those relationships that you have, Abhishek, right? And also the fact you've been able to very single-handedly impact many lives, right? So just give us a sense of the numbers at NavGurukul that you've been able to work with, work on, work for, right? Give me a sense of that.
Right. So far at NavGurukul, we have gotten about 160 jobs for our students. All of these jobs are basically ranging from 20 to 25,000 as their starting salary. But once they have spent some years in the industry, they're basically earning even 70, 80,000 rupees a month.
Right.
For them, it's obviously a huge growth.
Absolutely.
They're coming from families where the monthly family income was probably, let's say, 10 or 12,000 rupees,
Right.
largely from occupations like pulling a rickshaw or
Sure.
basically working as a peon, etc. And it's not just a financial jump, but it's also a very huge, it's a huge social jump as well. I mean, they're
Correct.
jumping into white collar jobs with a lot of dignity.
Right.
And one of the things that we have highlighted sometimes as a joke is that like none of the women that have gotten jobs have gotten married, while most of the women who basically dropped out have gotten married.
Right.
That itself, for example, is a social signal in terms of the
Right.
kind of autonomy the basically people are getting once they're getting jobs.
Right.
COVID has been a huge blow, obviously, because we have been running residential centers. So that's why I think our last year impact was limited. But this year we have essentially pulled our socks, and now we have a capacity of about 700 girls across our 4 campuses, 2 in Bangalore, 1 in Pune, 1 in Dharamshala.
Sure.
About 550 of these seats are essentially for women. And right now we have close to 350 to 400 people in our campuses. We are increasingly we're trying to basically have more girls. We selected about 900 girls this year, but
Right.
unfortunately because of COVID, not all of them basically can join.
Could be
Many of
okay.
them
Sure.
drop off.
Right.
We're also planning to start 3 more campuses this year: 1 in Tripura, 1 in Odisha, 1 in Delhi.
Wonderful.
We have been doing a very interesting partnership in Delhi, which we are still discussing. It's still, I mean, it has not been finalized, but we're essentially focusing on work. Like they've started a new university for which they're calling a skills university,
Correct.
and a part of that they will open a center or a college for software engineering, and we are going
Correct.
to completely look after the curriculum and the pedagogy and the training for it,
Interesting.
while they basically focus on the operations, the infrastructure, and the mobilization part of it.
Right.
So I mean, largely, even our approach going forward is to work a lot more with the governments. We are working
Sure.
a lot with Maharashtra government, Odisha
Right.
government, Tripura
Right.
government, among other governments. So our impact, I mean, our focus going forward, one is to scale our residential program.
Sure.
Second, we have recently launched an application on which around a few thousand people are learning. It's a very interesting application where people can learn programming in vernacular languages on the phone
Right.
itself without
Okay.
internet.
Okay.
Another very beautiful part of this application is that you can just buy a 200 rupees keyboard and a 20 rupees OTG cable, connect
Right.
it to your phone and learn typing.
Oh, interesting.
And I mean, typing I feel is a very interesting, small but very interesting skill because it leads to a lot of confidence.
Right.
And the kind of resource that you'll need with this application to learn typing is practically just 200 rupees.
Right.
No internet, nothing. Once your application is installed,
Sure.
most of the people I think struggle. And when we basically were researching, we realized that most of the people do not learn typing because they don't have access to laptops or desktops.
Right.
But access to phones is obviously much better.
Right.
So a lot of our focus on this application, including teaching, we're teaching spoken English, typing, programming, etc., is to basically bring most of these skills on a mobile format for people in the most marginalized areas.
Interesting.
The third initiative that we have started, and which we are still raising some funds for, is the Code India Fellowship. It's basically similar to how Teach for India Fellowship works,
Right.
but the idea is that we're going to get some of the smartest coders in the country, get them to go to the tribal areas, the rural areas, and teach programming over there. And essentially make sure that even if they're teaching, and mostly they're going to go into existing colleges itself.
Right.
So they may be teaching 200 people, and the hope is that they build a culture for
Sure.
learning and make sure at least some people are getting jobs to create hope for others. So that's the third model that we are now working on. We have also started a course in graphic design because we want to diversify the course offerings that we have.
Sure.
And that the plan is that every year we'll launch one new course. All of our courses are basically 1-year courses because we
Right.
want to make sure that these students can get a job soon, but also we should have sufficient time to be able to make to be able to do a very genuine transformation in terms of
Sure.
what the student knew before they came and what the student knows after they have graduated.
Right. That's very interesting, Abhishek. I think from being from doing a physical model, which of course is very cumbersome. There are like a lot of nuances and a lot of complexities around delivery. Ensuring safety, security. I think those are some very very serious challenges, right? I think your tech model essentially gives you scale, right? One question that I have is, is this a model that you've designed for a certain select category of people, or is this something which is available for all, right? I mean, is this going to go on to become like an edutech company, like the ones we're seeing, right? Which has its own trajectory path where you raise capital and of course then scale it, right? What is the target segment that you're going after?
So we are a non-profit, so we are not going the conventional edtech way. By the
Sure.
same time that the content that we are designing is available for everyone, it's open source as well.
Sure.
All of our content is I mean, we're building it in local languages.
Right.
So essentially, the primary target are people who are not comfortable with English. That itself changes a lot in terms of our demographics.
Sure.
And I think it's also important to acknowledge while our content we're developing it from the perspective of people in rural or tribal areas
Right.
with that level of ease, etc.
Sure.
It's equally useful for someone, let's say, who is entering middle class as a family, and English is not their first is
Sure.
not the first preference for their learning, basically.
Right. Very interesting. Very interesting. And at what age? When you talk about this product, right? At what age groups is this getting done, right? Or is this something which is available for everybody, right? Whoever wants to come in and learn can actually sign up and learn.
Yeah, so anyone can sign up and learn. I mean, in terms of age group, right now we are focusing because the content is
Sure.
essentially designed for
Sure.
13 plus age group.
Right.
But now we are also developing parts in the application which can aim at younger children.
Right.
And especially NEP, National Education Policy 2020, mandated coding classes from 6th
Sure.
onwards
Sure.
for the entire country. So we're also figuring out ways how we can essentially align with NEP and make sure that we're able to deliver quality understanding to programming and technology through this. And I think it's very very important to do that right away, because even if you look at the IT teaching in our country before NEP,
Right.
it was extremely abysmal. I mean, most of the people didn't know even how to open a computer properly or even how to use
Sure.
Microsoft Word.
Sure.
And coding is an altogether different plane. So
Right.
if we really want our people in our rural areas or in other areas to be able to learn programming, we have to make very radical changes in terms of how we deliver content.
Sure. Abhishek, one big problem is discovery, right? When you talk about rural areas, right? And I mean, they're not, for example, those are areas that are not as savvy when it comes to say discovering, what's up, what's not up, and all that, right? Getting into coding, picking it up, learning it, and ensuring that there's a certain continuity, right? It needs a lot of evangelization, right? I mean, there has to be somebody to come in and evangelize this, right? How are you ensuring that people get that awareness, right? How do you sort of choose that they pick the affinity to coding, right, or the comfort to coding, right? How do you evangelize at that point? So for example, a far-flung village in Chhattisgarh, right, which is not say as exposed to what we see in the urban area, it's very difficult to make them understand, even imagine and comprehend what the world is headed towards, right?
Yeah.
How do you do that? I mean, I've seen some of those areas. I know how they operate. I've worked with the government, right? So I understand the complexity that's there, right? And for the government, it's the most difficult question to answer, right?
Yeah.
How is it that you can go out and create, programs that are, universal in nature and relevant for people at that level, right? How are
Yeah.
you solving that complexity?
So first of all, I don't believe that all of this have to be universal. I mean, I mean, our idea of universal, I think, is very dangerous because we teach Pythagoras theorem to practically everyone in the school curriculum, and I don't
Sure.
think most of us need it, right? So
Right.
essentially, if we start teaching programming to people in a very remote village in Chhattisgarh who do
Right.
not even know English or basics of mathematics, I think it's going to be a disaster.
Sure.
It's not needed. It's not helpful. So, and especially as NavGurukul, we really ask this question internally all the time. Like we have to focus on life outcomes. We don't
Sure.
want to focus on learning outcomes.
Sure.
So we may go and teach someone some programming, but what changes in their life is what we call as life outcome.
Sure.
So we believe that there has to be a very clear shift in terms of uh, measuring life outcomes instead of learning outcomes. Because I can come and teach you some random things, and you may feel that you have learned something. I may feel that I have taught you something, but ultimately nothing may change in your life. And obviously a lot of people will say that it's okay to do that.
Sure.
And I understand it's okay to learn for the sake of learning, but at the same time, it's also important from the perspective of the child to figure out what are certain interventions which trigger life outcomes, right? While all of the initiatives don't have to do that, but at least a significant number have to do that so that something changes in the life of that child, right?
Right.
So especially talking about your example, I personally do not necessarily feel that they have to be taught programming.
Sure.
And in fact, we may need to choose places where we can essentially do that well and make sure
Okay.
there are certain conversions in terms of jobs or in terms of
Right.
admission opportunities to good colleges or even places like Nav Gurukul or Zoho School or HCL
Sure.
Tech B or Masai School or Newton School or blah blah blah. But the point is that we have to make sure that there are some conversions, and that's why our
Right.
focus at least is to start with places where evangelizers already exist, right? I mean, there are colleges which are run by people like you have mentioned who want to make sure that these colleges are actually better than what they're happening right now. So in some ways, there's already some kind of evangelizing happening. Then there's a chain of schools called KGBV, Kasturba Gandhi Bal Vidyalayas.
Right.
These are schools meant for basically girls, I think from tribal areas. They were earlier
Sure.
till 10th and now they've been extended to 12th.
Right.
So these are residential schools. Can you send
Sure.
your teachers, or especially these fellows, the code India fellows that I'm talking about, to these
Right.
schools and teach coding? And let's say you teach them in 11th and 12th class, let's say 200 girls in schools. And
Sure.
out of that, at least make sure 25 are getting jobs or they're getting admissions. And
Right.
that basically gives further motivation for another 175 girls to basically say that we want to learn coding as well. So I mean, I'm just saying rather than basically forcing
How do
coding
you
on
give
every
them the
student.
how do you give them the context? How do you give them the context, right? See, because
Yeah,
anything there is a motivation, right? You see something, you hear something, you feel
yeah,
something, you experience something, and that becomes your context, right? To say getting into a process of learning that skill, right?
right.
Uh, how do you do that, right? Because
So
there's a massive disconnect at that level,
yeah,
right? And
another way of
that's the
looking at
reason where I
context
came
is,
from evangelist, right?
yeah, another reason, another perspective of moving is to look from like context to motivation, like what
Sure.
motivates them and how do you motivate them, right? So I think one of the things in terms of motivation is to figure out, like for us is job, like we
Right.
really focus on job.
Sure.
So the first motivation that we build is that it is going to give you employability, is going to give you this particular kind of job. Then
Right.
we have our own alumni who basically talk about the kind of job that they got and
Sure.
essentially the fact that they could do it without doing college, without having science background, etc., etc. So I think that serves as the first lever of motivation.
Right.
In terms of building some context for essentially what programming is, we obviously have to change our examples.
Right.
We start talking about things that they see around them. If they're using a phone, it may be
Interesting.
basically about WhatsApp or any application that they're using. If
Right.
they see, if they use a washing machine, if they've seen a washing machine, it's basically that. If they've seen an Aadhaar-based fingerprint scanner, I mean,
Sure.
when people typically come to do KYC sector things for, we talk about those things, how they are using programming.
Sure.
So essentially, programming today is everywhere. So I mean, even if you're in rural area, you cannot escape things which have been designed by programming. So giving those examples is an exercise of context, and fellows that we essentially have basically focus on that. But largely, I think what we have to really crack more and more is motivation. And a
Sure.
lot of that is cracked when you see people getting jobs, right? I mean,
Right.
when you're essentially in a school and when your colleagues are getting jobs, it is when you
Correct.
really start feeling, oh, I can also do that.
I think
Uh,
that's a very interesting point that you highlighted, Abhishek. I think that's the first. I think that's an immediate go-to. I think that's essentially what everybody is trying to solve
yeah,
for or achieve, right, as an outcome. And I think that's a good point that you've highlighted, through this, right? That they might not necessarily understand the context, but I think getting a job is a large enough motivation for them
yeah,
to do this seriously, right?
yeah,
Because they possibly sense and believe that there are other people who've achieved it from the same fraternity community, and this could be their way out to the world, right? And I think that's a very interesting point that you
And it is
highlighted.
also how startup ecosystem developed, right? I mean, if you look
Yeah,
at 2010s of startup ecosystem,
sure.
there was a lot less context, and we were trying to build this motivation. We were trying to talk about Zomato. We were,
Sure.
I mean, IIT Delhi, we were talking about Zomato especially a lot because they're
Right.
from Zomato. Then we were talking about critical
Oh,
solutions. So a
right.
lot of these companies, and actually, not a lot, maybe a few. Snapdeal
Right.
was one because Rohit was from IIT Delhi.
Sure.
Actually, Rohit used to come sometimes in IIT, talk to the
Right.
alumni. I mean, talk to the people and the students as well as the alumni.
Sure.
So a lot of that essentially build this hope that I can
Sure.
also do this. I can also
Right.
pull it off. So
Right.
that role modeling, I think, is very, very critical.
Very interesting. Very interesting proposition. Abhishek, I've particularly been very intrigued by the entire, the physical infrastructure play that you have created, right? And I think that was the foundation of NavGurukul, right? Where you wanted to set up these centers and stuff like that, right? Tell me a little about the process that you have, right? That you sort of follow. And my sense is that I don't think that's a model that you are discontinuing with, right? I think that's a model which is very, which is at the which is all of what you're doing is designed around that model, right?
Yeah.
Give me a sense of the process that you follow. What are some of the things that you do, while you get these kids to come on board? What is that process like?
Right. So as Navgurukul, I mean, as I was saying that we essentially have been focusing a lot on what the earlier models of education were like
Sure.
Nalanda or Taxila. So a
Sure.
lot of our basically understanding comes from the fact that there has to be some kind of an apprentice system where
Right.
people are being trained by their peers or by their seniors instead of
Sure.
basically relying on a teacher.
Sure.
The problem with the teacher method is the fact that if let's say there's one teacher teaching 40 or 50 people, for the
Mhm.
teacher to be able to pay attention to an individual is very, very hard. So they
Sure.
basically focus on the one particular segment of the class, which basically makes sure the other segments of the class are practically left far behind.
Right.
Some teachers focus on the middle part of the section, some people focus on the top part of the section of
Sure.
the class. So at Navgurukul, what happens is, let's say when you come and join our center, and we believe residential centers are really, really important, and we still strongly and firmly believe in them, is basically because of the fact that there are a lot of girls, especially in rural areas, and they do not have the environment to be able to learn something as hard as software engineering
Right.
and get jobs just by being at their home. They need to
Sure.
come in an environment where people are essentially doing that all the time, and that college wala feeling is very, very
Right.
critical. That environment is very important.
Right.
So when a student basically comes to a campus, they are assigned a mentor who's basically, it's a 2 or 3 months a senior person to them, and that mentor has another mentor inside the system. And
Right.
finally, some of the senior most people have alumni or the outside volunteers who are working in some companies as
Sure.
their mentors.
Sure.
But there's this clear ladder or tree of mentorship mentee.
Right.
Then mentors are basically trained by some coaches who are again some students from the system
Right.
who basically ensure that the mentors understand how to teach.
Right.
We have developed our own set of 7 pedagogies, which focuses on the teaching methods. One of them is to basically how do we give feedback, right? I mean,
Right.
just the kind of feedback that we give essentially can make or break the student.
Right.
We don't have any kind of examinations in our system, largely because we believe that examinations are a huge distraction.
Sure.
Instead the student can ask that I want to be interviewed, and
Right.
then one of the persons interview them and essentially give them feedback, and that feedback
Sure.
again does not focus on objective marks or score. It
Right.
rather basically shares them the good, bad, and the ugly. Like, these are
Sure.
the good parts that you already have. These are the bad parts that you basically need to work upon, and these are
Right.
the ugly parts that maybe you can think about.
Sure.
And this framework of good, bad, and ugly as a feedback sector is something that we follow across our organization for employee
Interesting.
feedback reviews. Even
Right.
for our newsletter, we basically share the good, bad, and ugly.
Right.
And the focus again here is that as vulnerably we can we share where do we stand instead of giving ourselves, hey, we
Right.
are 9 out of 10 or 6 out of 10 or 3 out of 10.
Right.
So basically there are no examinations, there are no teachers per se. The students are encouraged to take classes for whatever
Right.
they've learned. This way we essentially build their ability to articulate something and be able to explain the concept to someone. Then there
Sure.
are bi-monthly hackathons that are organized. We don't have teachers per se, but our own alumni, we have hired them as associates in our campus to basically make sure all of these pedagogies are being followed. We have developed our own curriculum, which is in local languages, as I mentioned. The student use that curriculum as a reference. Most
Right.
of this curriculum is basically not teaching. Most of it is essentially projects or problem statements that they have to keep
Interesting.
solving.
Right.
One of the approaches that we say is that, I mean, if you go back to school, there was this approach
Sure.
of NCRT and
Right.
there was this approach of RS Agrawal. or RD Sharma. I think RS Agrawal and RD Sharma essentially, interestingly, had too many problems, and that really worked a lot for people who needed to learn by practicing.
Right.
I mean, there are people who just who look at a concept, understand, and be able to solve any problem out there.
Right.
For them, they necessarily didn't need an RS Agrawal.
Right.
But essentially, if you were someone who was not, who needed to solve a lot of problems, RS Agrawal really, really did help. So we follow the RS Agrawal approach. I mean, we give even for a simple concept like if else or loop, we give even 50 or hundreds of problems,
right?
Rather than just relying on you to basically learn the concept from 2 or 3 problems. So I mean, a lot of problem solving happens, and the students. One of the things that, because we don't examine the students through the examinations, but the student basically themselves sort of do that. And a big part of that engine is because they have this metric of we call job kab lagegi metric, I mean tracker. So in that tracker, basically based on their progress, they're basically shown ki aapki job kab lagegi. And there's students who can see that they'll get a job in 5 months. There's students who can see they get a job in 16 months. So that part is clear to them. Now they use that part to be able to say, oh, it's taking me a lot more time than I think I have in my hands. Then they'll come to their own mentor and say, how do I accelerate my journey? Because this way, instead of saying that you have a 4-year course and after the 4-year course results will come, now it's a journey that you can control. So for example, let's say Ashu dashboard says, hey, you have finished these many milestones and now you're at, it'll take you roughly 14 months to get a job. So now you can control your journey. You can come and say, hey, I need to fasten up this because I need a job sooner or later or whatever, right? So that kind of flexibility we try to build in the system.
That's amazing. And that's a lot of empowerment, right? I think, I think giving it in the hand of people where they can sort of really, manage the outcome, right? And I think it also helps in them bring in the seriousness, right? Because, not a lot of these guys are coming from, very, they're coming from a difficult background, right? I think having that kind of a control can really help them, be motivated at a very different level, right? But Abhishek, what is the financial? I mean, how's the financial model like, right? I mean, if you don't mind sharing it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, what is that model like? Because what you're doing, which is very, very disruptive in its sense, right, at a DN level. And while you're doing it as an NGO, right, a lot of this is very, very disruptive, right? So, tell me a little more about the financial model of Nav Gurukul, right? I mean, what is the construct like?
So a lot of our funds come from CSR, and most of the major tech companies are essentially our donors. And so far, fortunately, we didn't have to reach out even to a single donor because the model itself is pretty interesting. Within 1 to 1.1 lakhs, we're able to get a girl from a very marginalized area a job in software programming. And also the students have this, they're requested to pay forward if they can voluntarily for the future students. And we have also received about 24 lakhs in donations from our own alumni itself. Wow. And every month we are receiving more. So practically, we are trying to also build sustainability into the model by making sure that the alumni are contributing back to the system. And about 70% of our alumni, basically, they choose to pay forward, and they start with something as small as 500 or 1,000 rupees a month, but they keep on adding it as they basically grow into the jobs. Many of our students have already paid us more than 1.2 lakhs. I think it's already 8 or 9 of our alumni have paid us 1.2 lakhs.
Wow.
So they have paid more than what has been spent on them practically. And all of this is, voluntary donations. So that's even more beautiful because you're not forcing anyone to do this. Apart from that, we basically raise funds from individuals. We raise funds from people who can essentially afford to basically donate more. And a lot of that funds is essentially used in the research and basically building pedagogies, because a lot of the CSR funds are tied up in terms of how do you spend them. But the funds that we get from the individuals, I think that's very, very precious to us. We are also trying to now figure out way to receive foreign funds, largely because there are certain compliance issues around in India. So we'll probably setting up an entity in US for that as well, for crowdfunding. But yeah, crowdfunding and CSR are two major sources of getting initial revenues. Then alumni donations is as a source of replenishing those revenues. And the hope is that in every few years, we will be able to make a center completely financially sustainable. Like one of our centers is going to be financially sustainable within a few months.
Wow, that is absolutely fantastic, Abhishek. I think COVID has also done, it's brought a change to our lives, right? The way we think. And I think a lot of people have kind of stood up and said that, we're going to contribute either for food or for, say, clothing or for travel or, whatever, right? In the second wave, I think it was more to do with, the healthcare equipment, so on and so forth, right? And I think India is on a very different track, right? I think, or not just India, but I think globally we are, as a humankind, we are on a very different track, right? I think contribution is now, become a part of us, right? In some way, they're contributing, right? And I think what you're really doing Abhishek, when I look at what has happened, the kind of travesty that we've gone through, right,
Yeah.
with COVID, right. I think this could have been very, very different had we had a right education ecosystem, because
Yeah.
there was a large set of people who didn't have the understanding to deal with absolutely basic information which was being passed on, right, in terms of say medication, in terms of maintaining distance, and so on and so forth, right. And I think had we had the education, that would have done it right. Government is doing its own thing, right? But of course, the kind of goes to the challenges. But I think with what you are doing is a very different kind of an awareness that you're bringing to the table, right? And I particularly like the model that you're doing, right? Which is a very Gurukul like model that you are kind of creating, right? Which is one hand holding the other to a better future, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's particularly very, very interesting. Abhishek, very quickly, what is the next 5 years like, right? What are the next 5 years like?
So we are essentially adding one new course every single year. We're adding a lot of centers. Our focus is to make sure that by next year we have at least 5,000 seats in software engineering and another 2,000 to 3,000 seats from other courses, all residential. Apart from that, the focus is to make sure that one of the focus is to make sure that the application, online application that we have started talking about,
Right.
and we have already done government partnerships for it to be able to
Right.
make sure that at least it's used by another 10 million people, and mostly focusing on job readiness
Right.
part. And then the third program that we are essentially scaling up is our Code India Fellowship. So
Right.
hope is by that time around we should have at least 400 to 500 fellows. And it looks like we are on the track for basically all of these things.
Right.
Code India Fellowship is the only thing which is very new, and we still have to be more conservative with our projections. But
Right.
I think hopefully for at least all of the parts, we are more or less on that trajectory.
Interesting. It's good to see a social entrepreneur running one like a startup, right? It's absolutely fantastic, right? Abhishek, your social enterprise is very difficult, right? Being in a social, and it requires for a very different kind of a motivation, right? It calls for a lot of selflessness, right? When you're trying to sort of build something, right? Which is very different from what you're doing when you're building a startup, right? Because there is a very
Right.
different kind of an answerability. You're in a very different environment, right? The matrices that you're chasing are very, very different. Right? What are your and that said, right, a lot of people very strongly feel about contributing to a social cause, right? Hopefully, we're going to have many, many entrepreneurs who are going to come out of, in a post-COVID environment, who will be working in some way or the other on creating a social enterprise, which can, in its own limited way, has a certain impact, right? A lot of people have already started to do that, right? So, for
Yeah.
example, I know of women, who've been mothers, right, and they've started to teach kids of their maids and drivers at home, and so on and so forth, right? What are your top two or three advices, inputs, right, for people who are wanting to, who are either doing, work in the social sector, or want to start out, right? What are your top two or three? I wouldn't say advice, but an input, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, how to keep that motivation going, right? What are your inputs on that?
Right. I think, and if I understand correctly, you're talking about part-time contribution, or are you talking
I'm
about
saying in
people?
general. I'm saying in
Okay.
general. Whoever wants to pursue social entrepreneurship,
Right.
what's your input to them, right? Keep going,
Right.
right? For example, right?
Right. I
How do
personally
you
feel,
keep themselves motivated?
yeah. So I think social entrepreneurship is extremely, extremely hard. It's not just
Good,
because you have a very different financial motivation or financial,
good,
expectations out of it. At the same time, it's also emotionally exhausting because you're working with people on the ground, and the challenges that they face are essentially sometimes they emotionally break you down.
correct,
Even like when COVID was happening, there were so many of our own alumni and students,
right,
the kind of help that they needed, the support that they needed. And a lot of times we fail to sort of provide on that.
good,
And every time you fail, you basically, there's a part of you which really cries.
good,
And unfortunately, there's no way you're not going to fail, right? I mean, either you're planning too small, or if you're planning, I mean, according to the size you can cater to, more or less, it's always going to be the case where many requests you're going to deny. It happened, I think, with any COVID-related initiative which came up to serve other people, right? It might be initiatives trying to bring oxygen or trying to bring anything.
right,
So I feel in general, social sector comes with a lot of emotional exhaustion,
good,
particularly. Nobody wants to sort of decide whether this seat, either for oxygen or for a academic seat, should go to this person or that person.
good,
And unfortunately, you make that decision every single day, right? I mean,
right,
you always have resources in a very limited manner.
good,
So I feel essentially, if you're entering into social sector or social enterprise sector, just make sure you're essentially Yeah, we are well supported by people around you.
Right.
Reach out to people, and I
Sure.
think people are really eager to help. I've been helped by so many people.
Right.
The beautiful people who will offer you a lot of listening space to just understand what you are feeling, how you want to work on that. The ecosystem is heavily supportive, especially because
Sure.
I think they understand the fact that this can be emotionally so triggering and tough.
Sure.
So build around that. In terms of resources, it's a challenge today. It's actually
Right.
becoming even more challenging, especially because of COVID. uh, Resources per organization are even getting scarcer. A lot of
Right.
resources are going into COVID relief, which is obviously the necessity right now. But a lot of
Right.
other initiatives, for example, if you're working in education sector, you're bound to struggle right now.
Right.
But at the same time, I think but also as Ashu have mentioned, I mean, the mindset of giving is also changing. So
Sure.
hopefully, we will
Absolutely.
be able to sort of also within a year or 2 year, we'll be able to end up in a place where there's a lot more giving,
Right.
a lot more compassion, and giving is not just limited to money, it's also a lot of time, right? I mean, as you
Exactly.
mentioned, people who are essentially working, the mothers who are basically teaching
Right.
the children of the maids, etc. And I think that's really important and beautiful, and hopefully as it builds up, it's going to be easier for social entrepreneurs. Largely I feel just understand what motivates you, right? I mean, one of the things that I've seen is that people come into social sector thinking that they'll make big change, they'll change
Right.
that. I mean, it doesn't happen that way. Social
Sure.
sector changes are typically very slow.
Sure.
Maybe relief work can still be fast, because in
Right.
relief work everything is so urgent, people act very urgently.
Sure.
Maybe in 10 days you can raise few crores. But
Right.
if you're talking about, let's say, building something in education
A
or
longer change.
any long-term solution healthcare,
Yeah.
it will take maybe a decade to build something really meaningful.
Right.
Or at least I would say 3 to 5 years window is the least amount of window that can qualify for that.
Sure.
And that's the same thing for startups as well.
Right.
Just that in startup there are many other levers. For example, financially you'll be supported after 2 or 3 years properly.
Right.
But in social sector it may be the situation that even after 4 years your financial support is very limited. So
Right.
so come up with right set of motivations, come up with right set of understanding of what do you need in terms of your financial things. And
Sure.
again, one reason why I'm stressing on financial things again and again is because for a lot of us, we jump into social sector thinking about 1 or 2 years, but we
Right.
don't have a plan for understanding what our financial needs are going to look like for next 5 years.
Sure.
And then around third year or fourth year, we start feeling frustrated or burnt out,
Right. Right.
not being adequately paid, and it leads to a lot of dropouts as well. So I think all
Correct.
those motivations need to be figured out very well.
Abhishek, I think so beautifully put, right? I think, I did that last year. I was part of an initiative where we were doing food for people. And what you said about emotional exhaustion, right? I think it is so difficult, right? We did that for a few days. And trust you me, it was, it hurt us and hit us so hard. It just changes you as a person, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure, what you're trying to highlight and dealing with it every day is so much more difficult, right? So I think it has to have a very different kind of a motivation. I think impact has to be, sense of impact that you're creating has to be so long term, right? That it
Yeah.
continues to motivate you every single morning that you get up, right?
Yeah.
Abhishek, when you're building an enterprise and when you're especially trying to bring a social change, right, or revolution, right, in a certain sense and way, right, in the lives of people who need it the most, right, always require more and more hands and more heads is how I put it, right? How can people become a part of what you're doing at NavGurukul, right? How can people reach out to you? How can people, with time, with say certain contributions, how can they do that, right? What is the best way to speak with Abhishek's team, and the NavGurukul team, right? How can they do that?
Right. So NavGurukul is a pretty volunteer-friendly structure. I mean, in fact, we have a lot more volunteers than we have team members. In fact, I would say at least 30 to 40% of our work is accomplished by volunteers.
Sure.
And so essentially, you can just go to a website, look for a volunteer page, and just write in, apply to the form or whatever. I
Right.
will directly reach out to you. So we really work a lot with volunteers in terms of people who can code and help us build our technologies, people who
Sure.
can teach either programming or English or anything that you like. We have thousands of people who are learning through our online platforms,
Right.
which feature live classes. So people also, take classes on concepts that they like. So if you want to teach art, you teach art. It's as simple as that.
Right. Right.
And apart from that, we have specialized positions also. Like for most of our team, we have this very beautiful structure of getting
Sure.
coaches or advisors from outside who basically coach our team members individually. So basically,
Right.
every person in our team is assigned an outside coach. So we also get some experts from outside to basically work as coaches with our team. We essentially have advisory. We are building advisory boards for multiple parts of our organization. For example,
Right.
School of Design, School of Programming, the application that we're talking about. So essentially, I mean, it's just very easy to sort of get in touch with us. Just
Very interesting.
go to a website or LinkedIn or anywhere. You'll probably find even my phone number right there. Just drop me a message and call me.
I think Abhishek, this was a very different kind of a session, right? Usually, when I'm talking to founders, I have when you're discussing them, when you are discussing the kind of insights and kind of complexities that they deal with is it gives you a very different kind of a thought process, right? This discussion today is so heartening. I can't even explain it to you, right? I think the kind of impact that you're trying to create is absolutely phenomenal, so beautiful, right? And I very firmly and strongly believe in the cause of bringing people from the bottom of the pyramid to the mainstream, right? And I think education is the most significant and the most critical and empowering tool that you can give them, right? And that's the biggest normalizer, right? And an equalizer in that sense, right? Abhishek, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you. It was an absolutely smashing session. I think this is a session which is going to stay with me for a very, very long time. Thank you for taking the time out.
Thanks so much, Ashu, for the kind words. And the work that you did with your initiative last year, I think it was very hard to
We
really
tried.
just read about it. Yeah.
We
Thanks so
tried. It
much.
changed me. It changed me as a person,
Yeah.
right? And I think I look at social impact and social sector in a very different way, right? And thanks to Ganesh, right, for making us a part of that initiative. Whatever we little we could do with the great team that we had, we tried to do that. Right? And I think that we're definitely all of us have changed individuals by the end of it. And I think thanks to him, right? And I think we need more such people, right? We need more
Absolutely.
such people like Abhishek.
Yeah.
We need more such people like Ganesh, right? To go out there and create initiatives, right? That normal people like us can come in and contribute, right? And become a part of it in a certain way and sleep well by the end of the day. Thank you so much, Abhishek. It was
Thanks.
a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, same here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.